Flight attendant slaps young girl, not knowing she's the mayor's daughter. Prepare to enter a world where secrets hide in every shadow and where one fateful moment aboard a commercial airliner will change a young girl's life forever. In this story, hidden truths collide with public images, and the sparkle of innocence crashes into the hard edge of injustice. What begins as a seemingly ordinary flight soon spirals into a tapestry of betrayals, alliances, and whispered confessions. No one on board anticipates how a single heated encounter will spark a chain of events that threatens to topple reputations and expose dark webs of deception. Get ready for an unforgettable journey of power, pride, and ultimate reckoning. Before we dive in, if you're new here, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. If you're excited about this story, let us know. If you enjoyed the video, press 1. If not, press O. Your feedback really inspires me to gather more uplifting and meaningful stories. The fluorescent glow of Gate B14 at John F. Kennedy International Airport was both calming and unnerving to Lucy Ainsworth. At 14, she had traveled on countless flights for summer camps and school trips, but something felt different this time. Her father, Mayor Harold Ainsworth, had told her he'd meet her at her destination, a brief political engagement having forced him onto a different itinerary. Despite her familiarity with airports, Lucy found herself oddly on edge as she clutched a lime green backpack stuffed with art supplies and her trusty journal. She wasn't scared exactly, it was more of a peculiar anticipation, like the quiet before a thunderstorm. Nearby, flight attendant Harriet Westbrook was finishing a terse phone call. Her life had been a whirlwind, lately bill collectors, a tense breakup with her longtime partner, and rumors about layoffs at the airline. Harriet had always prided herself on maintaining professionalism, but the cracks in her composure had started to show. She checked her reflection in the bathroom mirror, noticing dark circles beneath her eyes. In a moment of frustration, she mumbled to herself about how she despised the traveling public's incessant demands. This flight to Los Angeles was just another shift she needed to endure, another parade of faces, each with their own requests. Lucy's ticket beeped at the gate, and she offered the agent a shy smile before stepping onto the jet bridge leading to the Boeing 737 MAX. The cool air, conditioned breeze in the narrow corridor made her heart flutter with excitement. Moments later, Harriet stood at the cabin door, greeting passengers with a mechanical politeness that betrayed her exhaustion. When Lucy approached, Harriet paused for an extra second, scanning the girl's wide eyes and disheveled ponytail. Maybe there was a trace of envy buried in Harriet's heart, an echo of her own youth, long eroded by time and disappointment. Just before Lucy could take her seat in the crowded economy class, a loud clatter erupted behind her. Another passenger had dropped a metal water bottle, causing a commotion as it rolled down the aisle. Harriet, already strained, rushed over with forced courtesy. A sense of disquiet rippled through the cabin, a subtle undercurrent that no one could name. Lucy felt it keenly. She glanced at her seatmate, an older woman with kind eyes, hoping for reassurance. Instead, she was met with the woman's anxious expression, as though she, too, sensed that something was off about this flight. Unbeknownst to Lucy, her father's political career was balanced on a razor's edge. A city council scandal had recently placed the mayor's office under intense scrutiny. Voters were eager for any sign of impropriety, and his opponents circled like vultures. Mayor Ainsworth had decided Lucy's trip to Los Angeles might be safer away from the media frenzy. Yet his precaution inadvertently placed her in a situation he never could have predicted. From the cockpit, Captain Roger O'Bannon and First Officer Tina Delgado prepared for takeoff, unaware of the storm that was brewing, not in the clouds above, but in the hearts of those on board. As the last few passengers filed in, Harriet provided the pre-flight safety demonstration. Her voice projected with a hollow, practiced tone. Lucy tried to pay attention, but her mind wandered, sifting through images of her father's concerned face and the hush of their last conversation. Harriet caught Lucy's distant gaze. Something about it irritated her, sparking a momentary flash of frustration. She couldn't explain why this teenager's presence unsettled her so deeply. Harriet told herself it was just fatigue, that all she needed was a few hours of rest. But in truth, Lucy reminded her of opportunities lost and the weight of her own regret. When the plane roared down the runway and lifted into the sky, Lucy gripped the armrests, adrenaline mingling with excitement. Below, the lights of New York City shimmered like stars scattered across the earth. Harriet marched up and down the aisle shortly after takeoff, checking seat belts, shushing rowdy passengers, and distributing headphones for the in-flight movie. Her expression was stern, almost militant. Some passengers whispered that she was too uptight, but Harriet didn't care. She had a job to do, bills to pay, and no time for nonsense. 10 minutes into the flight, Harriet approached Lucy's row to offer refreshments. Lucy politely asked for a ginger ale, her voice barely above a whisper. Harriet forced a smile, poured the soda into a plastic cup, and handed it over with practiced efficiency. The cabin was buzzing with multiple requests, and Harriet felt her patience wear thin as the older woman next to Lucy asked for extra napkins. Harriet complied, but her jaw tightened. She began to resent Lucy's wide-eyed innocence, the girl's quiet aura that only magnified Harriet's own fatigue. Suddenly, turbulence rattled the plane. Overhead bins shook, plastic cups trembled in their holders, and a collective gasp filled the cabin. Lucy clutched her ginger ale. In her panic, she accidentally knocked the cup sideways, sending a stream of fizzing liquid onto Harriet's pristine uniform. The flight attendant froze in shock, her eyes blazing with anger. Lucy gasped, sputtering apologies while scrambling for the napkins Harriet had just handed over. The older woman beside Lucy tried to help, but Harriet stepped back, her chest heaving with indignation. At that moment, Harriet's frayed composure snapped. She let out a biting remark about careless children who should be more mindful of their surroundings. Lucy's face flushed with embarrassment as whispers spread among nearby passengers. Though it was clearly an accident, Harriet's fury felt personal. A tension gripped the airplane cabin like a coiled spring, as if the entire flight had been waiting for some trigger. Little did anyone know, this was only the beginning of a tempest that would shake the foundations of Lucy's family and Harriet's own professional life. As the airplane settled from the turbulence, Harriet retreated to the aft galley, muttering under her breath. Her colleagues in the cabin crew gave her worried glances, but chose not to intervene. Harriet's foul mood had been evident for weeks, and no one wanted to make it worse. Lucy's cheeks burned with a mixture of embarrassment and guilt. She had never seen an adult flare up like that over spilled soda. Her seatmate patted her hand reassuringly, whispering that everything would be fine. But Lucy could sense the tension radiating from the galley, as though Harriet's anger hovered in the air, thick and unyielding. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain O'Bannon and First Officer Delgado were discussing a potential weather diversion. Reports indicated a line of severe storms around the Midwest, and the two pilots had to decide whether to alter their route for safety. Their voices crackled over the radio, an undercurrent of concern in each transmission. Neither suspected the human storm brewing behind the cockpit door. They couldn't hear the whispered rumors among the passengers or see the stony glare that Harriet directed at Lucy from time to time. Lucy tried to distract herself by flipping through her sketchbook, focusing on half-finished drawings of cityscapes and portraits. Her father had always encouraged her artistic pursuits, praising her for bringing color to a world often painted in shades of grey. She remembered his parting words at the airport, urging her to stay out of trouble and keep her head high. Little did he know that trouble had found her, in the form of a disgruntled flight attendant who could not let a minor accident go. Each scratch of pencil on paper did little to calm Lucy's nerves. As the flight attendants prepared the drink cart again, Harriet gathered a stack of paper towels and marched over to Lucy's row. She thrust them at the girl with a curt instruction to clean up her own mess. Lucy complied, fumbling to wipe up any residual soda. Her seatmate tried to lighten the mood by joking about bumpy rides, but Harriet wasn't having it. She pivoted on her heel and stomped off, leaving Lucy's hands shaking. The entire exchange had been brief and tense, turning even the chatter of other passengers into hushed murmurs. Unknown to Harriet, Lucy was not only Mayor Ainsworth's daughter, but also a favorite subject of the local media when it came to highlighting the mayor's family life. Lucy's presence in front-page stories had softened her father's image, showing him as a devoted single parent. Harriet, of course, was oblivious to this fact. She only saw a clumsy teenager who represented one more annoyance in a long string of irritations. Even if Harriet had been aware, her current state of mind might not have changed. She felt a deep-seated anger she couldn't quite name, an anger that had been festering long before Lucy ever boarded the plane. Just as the cabin seemed to calm, a sudden announcement crackled over the pass system. Captain O'Bannon informed everyone that due to a developing weather system, the plane would be making an unscheduled landing at Hartsfield-Jackson Atlanta International Airport to refuel and reassess their route. A collective groan rose from passengers anxious to reach Los Angeles on time. Lucy blinked in confusion, uncertain whether this detour would affect her meeting with her father, who had planned to greet her upon arrival. Harriet clenched her jaw, dreading the extended shift this diversion would create. Upon touchdown in Atlanta, the aircraft taxied to a remote gate. Passengers were allowed to deplane briefly to stretch their legs and grab a quick snack. But Harriet was tasked with staying near the jet bridge to assist with any passenger issues. Lucy disembarked, relieved to have a moment away from the tense atmosphere. The bustling terminal offered a momentary escape, bright lights, hurried travelers, and the aroma of coffee shops. Lucy took the opportunity to breathe, sipping on a bottled water she purchased, hoping to quell the knot in her stomach. Back on board, Harriet scrolled through her phone, ignoring a slew of missed calls from debt collectors. She considered stepping out for a quick smoke break, but realized time was too short. When Lucy re-entered, Harriet felt her ire spike again, for reasons she couldn't fully articulate. Something about the girl's calm composure and wide-eyed curiosity grated on her. Harriet forced a tight-lipped smile, which Lucy met with a timid nod. The air between them crackled like static electricity, unseen but undeniably present. After refueling, the flight was cleared to continue. The delay had caused tension among the passengers, some of whom complained loudly to Harriet or her colleagues. The flight attendant tried to maintain a veneer of courtesy, but her patience was wearing dangerously thin. Lucy, sensing the cold demeanor, kept her head down and tried to remain invisible. She drew quietly, capturing the swirl of clouds outside the window, her pencil shading stormy skies that mirrored her inner turmoil. As the plane ascended once more, Harriet's temper flared again when a group of tourists blocking the aisle took too long to settle into their seats. She barked at them to move along. Murmurs spread through the cabin about her hostility, but Harriet barely noticed. All she saw was a cabin full of potential inconveniences. In that moment, Lucy glanced over, her eyes filled with empathy. Harriet stared back, the weight of her personal struggles pushing her toward a breaking point she would soon regret crossing. The seeds of conflict had been sown, and they were ready to erupt in a most unpredictable manner. The flight continued for another hour without major incident, though the air of tension persisted. Lucy sensed that Harriet was on a razor's edge. She tried her best to remain inconspicuous, reading her sketchbook, listening to music on her headphones, and sipping water instead of risking another soda spill. Meanwhile, Harriet performed her duties with a rigid formality that left passengers wary. Even the other flight attendants exchanged uneasy glances, unsure of how to handle their colleagues' volatility. The hum of the engines provided a constant backdrop, a droning reminder that they were all trapped together at 30,000 feet. Out of nowhere, a frantic beeping broke through the monotony. One of the overhead panels signaled an equipment malfunction in the galley. Harriet groaned as she strode to the back of the plane to investigate. By this point, her nerves were shot. A maintenance light had begun flashing, indicating an issue with the coffee maker, seemingly minor, yet one more annoyance. She tried to reset it, jabbing at the buttons, but the alert wouldn't stop. Finally, Harriet yanked the circuit breaker for the device, silencing the beeping. Little did she know that this small moment of frustration was another link in the chain of fate that would eventually snap. In first class, an argument had erupted between two well-dressed businessmen. One accused the other of stealing his tablet charger, and the dispute escalated quickly. Harriet's colleague, Maria, attempted to defuse the situation, but tensions remained high. Lucy, who was seated closer to the economy section, only heard muffled shouts. She turned to her seatmate for information, but the woman just shrugged helplessly. The cacophony of voices, the cramped space, and the unpredictability of air travel began to create a powder keg atmosphere throughout the cabin. Harriet returned to the economy section, looking for Lucy. A part of her brain recognized that she was fixating on the young girl, yet she couldn't stop. She told herself it was because Lucy was accident-prone or disruptive, even though Lucy had hardly made a sound since the soda incident. The truth was more complicated. Harriet's anxiety and anger needed a target, and Lucy, in her youthful innocence, was an easy focus for those unresolved frustrations. Harriet questioned Lucy about her seatbelt, making sure it was secure, but her tone was unmistakably accusatory. Just as Harriet's interrogation of Lucy began to draw concerned looks from nearby passengers, the plane was rocked by unexpected turbulence. The fasten seatbelt sign dinged on overhead, and an announcement crackled, instructing everyone to remain in their seats. Lucy clung to her armrests. Her heart pounded, recalling the earlier soda spill. Harriet had to steady herself by gripping a headrest, nearly tumbling into another passenger's lap. Panic flickered in her eyes, but she swallowed it and continued walking through the aisle, bracing against the shaking fuselage. Another wave of turbulence caused the lights to flicker momentarily, sending gasps through the cabin. A baby wailed in the back. Lucy's stomach flipped, but she tried to breathe slowly, focusing on a safety card in the seat pocket. Even Harriet's steely demeanor softened for a split second as she rushed to her jump seat and strapped in. It was a tense minute or two, with the aircraft jostling amid storm clouds, but eventually the ride smoothed out. Relief spread among the passengers, but an undercurrent of dread remained. After the seatbelt sign was turned off again, Harriet unbuckled and made her way down the aisle. Scanning for Lucy, she spotted the girl biting her lip, staring out the window. Harriet couldn't explain the surge of irritation that welled up. Without warning, she loomed over Lucy's row, her glare turning heads. In a curt voice, Harriet demanded Lucy place her backpack in the overhead bin, even though it was already stowed safely under the seat. Confused, Lucy complied, standing up to stuff her backpack above. The seatmate watched in alarm, sensing Harriet's hostility. Suddenly, a deep voice from across the aisle intervened. It belonged to a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, who introduced himself as Officer Martinez, a law enforcement officer traveling on personal business. He gently asked Harriet to calm down and explained that Lucy hadn't done anything wrong. Harriet shot him a venomous look, retorting that it was none of his concern. The tension escalated quickly and curious eyes turned toward the confrontation. Lucy shrank into her seat, tears pooling in her eyes. She had never been the center of such a public spectacle. Officer Martinez stood, his posture firm but non-threatening. He said he could see that Harriet was distressed and offered to help in any way he could. Harriet's pride flared. She spat back a reply about meddlesome passengers, thinking they knew her job better than she did. The officer sighed, recognizing that the situation was precarious. He glanced at Lucy, who was trembling, and felt a surge of protectiveness. He was off duty, but he couldn't just stand by and watch the young girl be intimidated. The standoff ended abruptly when another flight attendant arrived, urging Harriet to come to the galley to assist with a medical concern in row 23. Reluctantly, Harriet tore her gaze away from Lucy and followed. Officer Martinez exhaled, then turned to Lucy, assuring her that everything would be okay. Though Lucy nodded, she could feel the unsettling undercurrent swirling. Something told her this wasn't over, and the storm in Harriet's eyes would return soon enough. She couldn't have guessed how explosive the next encounter would be, or how high the stakes would climb before the flight finally landed. The medical situation in row 23 turned out to be a simple case of lightheadedness, an elderly man who had forgotten to eat before the flight. Harriet offered him water and a packet of crackers, following protocol with an almost robotic detachment. All the while, her thoughts simmered on Lucy and Officer Martinez, replaying the confrontation over and over. She hated feeling cornered, and she loathed being reprimanded. Harriet reminded herself that the flight was only a few more hours. Soon she could lock away her uniform and all her troubles behind the anonymity of a busy airport lounge. Lucy, still shaken, held her sketchbook in her lap, trying to regain composure. She drew slow circles on the edge of a blank page, wishing she could vanish into the pencil lines. Her seatmate offered comforting words, praising Lucy's courage for keeping calm under Harriet's ire. But Lucy couldn't help feeling guilty, as though she had somehow caused Harriet's misery. The hush that had fallen over the rows around her felt heavier than any turbulence. She thought about texting her father, but realized that airplane mode prevented any messages from sending. So she waited, heart pounding. Officer Martinez discreetly kept watch, ready to step in if Harriet returned with the same aggressive stance. He noticed Lucy's trembling fingers and gave her a nod of reassurance from across the aisle. Though the plane had mostly quieted, the tension lingered like static electricity in the pressurized air. Some passengers scrolled through their phones, playing offline games or reading e-books, while others tried to sleep. But an uneasy anticipation had settled, as if everyone was bracing for the next confrontation. In the flight deck, Captain O'Bannon and First Officer Delgado were wrestling with another dilemma. Updated weather reports showed the route to Los Angeles was still riddled with storms. The pilots weighed whether they should reroute again or push through. Fuel calculations played a pivotal role, and the airline's dispatch weighed in, leaving the decision up to the cockpit. Neither pilot was aware of the chaos simmering in the cabin. They only knew time was pressing and tension was high, though for different reasons. Suddenly, a loud thump echoed through the fuselage, causing passengers to jolt in their seats. The plane shook, as if it had struck something in mid-air. Gasps and cries erupted, but the cockpit announced there was no immediate danger, likely just a pocket of severe turbulence. Harriet clutched a service cart to keep it from toppling over. Lucy's heart raced, and she hugged her sketchbook tightly. Another wave of turbulence rattled the overhead bins, and a few passengers began to pray aloud. As the jostling subsided, Harriet found herself next to Lucy's row again. Her eyes fell on Lucy with an unsettling intensity. In a voice barely above a whisper, Harriet murmured, You think you can do whatever you want because you're a spoiled kid, don't you? Lucy froze, disbelief flooding her expression. The seatmate drew in a sharp breath. Harriet's tone dripped with bitterness, and for a moment, Lucy couldn't speak. Then she managed to stammer that she didn't understand why Harriet was angry. Harriet's face contorted, her pent-up frustration seeking release. She accused Lucy of flaunting her privilege, implying that children of prominent figures got away with everything. Unaware of Lucy's exact circumstances, Harriet's words were fueled by her own resentments, struggles with debt, a stagnant career, and a sense of being trapped in an endless cycle of service. Lucy could only stare, her eyes brimming with tears. She wanted to shout that she wasn't who Harriet thought she was, that she was just a normal girl trying her best. But fear locked her voice. This time, the confrontation drew the attention of several nearby passengers. An older gentleman tried to intervene, asking Harriet to lower her voice and remember her professionalism. Harriet spun on him, retorting that he should mind his own business. Sensing the situation spiraling, Lucy's seatmate tapped the call button, hoping another flight attendant would step in. Rumblings of discontent spread through the cabin as onlookers realized how unjustly Harriet was singling Lucy out. The hush was replaced by tense murmurs. A few rows ahead, Officer Martinez rose, ready to defuse the confrontation once again. He stepped toward Harriet, hands raised in a gesture of peace. Speaking calmly, he reminded her that they were all on the same flight, each person dealing with their own troubles. Harriet's hands balled into fists at her sides. She opened her mouth, perhaps to launch another tirade, but seemed to think better of it. Abruptly, she turned on her heel and stormed off toward the galley, leaving Lucy shaking and on the verge of tears. Though the immediate tension subsided with Harriet's retreat, the damage was done. Passengers whispered in hushed tones about the flight attendant's bizarre hostility. Some considered filing complaints with the airline upon landing. Lucy felt raw and exposed, as if Harriet's words had torn open a wound she didn't know existed. In that moment, she realized that no matter how ordinary she tried to be, her identity and her father's position would always color how people viewed her. Unbeknownst to Harriet, her meltdown had set a series of events in motion that no storm or flight path change could divert. The day of reckoning was drawing near. Seated in her jump seat during a momentary lull, Harriet felt a pang of regret. She replayed her harsh words in her mind, recognizing that she'd crossed a line. Yet, instead of apologizing, she steeled herself, deciding it was too late for niceties. In truth, her life had been unraveling for months. Ever since the first eviction notice appeared and her now ex-partner walked out, Harriet had been spiraling. She thought about the piling debts, the relentless phone calls demanding payment. The sting of regret and desperation made her lash out at anyone who seemed to have an easier life like Lucy, with her youthful optimism. In the cabin, Lucy wiped her eyes. A sense of injustice welled up within her, clashing with her natural inclination to avoid conflict. She glanced at the other passengers, many of whom offered sympathetic smiles. The older woman next to her gently squeezed her shoulder. Lucy tried to focus on her father's face in her mind, recalling the warmth of his encouragement. She clung to the thought that soon she'd be in Los Angeles, away from this nightmare at 30, feet. But a small voice inside warned that Harriet wasn't finished. Just then, Maria, the kinder flight attendant, strolled by, placing a reassuring hand on Lucy's seat. She apologized for the turbulence and Harriet's behavior, quietly suggesting that Lucy not take it personally. Lucy nodded, grateful for the kindness. Maria offered a complimentary snack box and left a phone number for passenger assistance. In case Lucy wanted to file a formal complaint, it was a small gesture, but it felt like a lifeline. Lucy carefully tucked the card into her journal, still uncertain whether she would use it. Officer Martinez watched the exchange. He admired how Lucy held herself together, given the circumstances. When Maria moved on, he leaned over the aisle. "You okay, kiddo?" he asked softly. Lucy mustered a shaky smile and nodded. Though they had only just met, the officer's concern felt genuine. He promised that if Harriet tried anything again, he would step in. Lucy thanked him, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engines. As the flight wore on, the cabin lights dimmed, signaling the start of the in-flight movie. Many passengers tried to sleep or distract themselves with the small seat back screens. Lucy decided to sketch, her pencil weaving a grayscale version of the dramatic sky she'd glimpsed during takeoff. She added silhouettes of airplanes, shading them ominously. Drawing soothed her frayed nerves, each stroke of graphite a quiet form of therapy. Still, her thoughts wandered to Harriet and the bitterness behind her rage. Harriet remained out of sight for a while, likely cooling off in the flight attendant's quarters. Maria and another colleague handled most of the passenger requests, handing out blankets and small bottles of water. The hush of the cabin was punctuated by the occasional cough or rustling of snack wrappers. Despite the lull, an undercurrent of anxiety persisted. Passengers exchanged whispers about Harriet, questioning what had pushed her to this extreme. Some speculated about her personal life. Others insisted that no personal struggle justified harassment. At one point, Lucy dozed off, pencil slipping from her fingers. Her dreams were fragmented, a collage of storms, flashing anger in Harriet's eyes, and her father's face filled with concern. She jerked awake when a stray bit of turbulence jolted the plane. Heart pounding, she looked around to see that most passengers were either asleep or gazing at their screens. But Harriet was nowhere in sight. Lucy exhaled, relieved. Yet her relief was short-lived. A disembodied voice shattered the stillness. Harriet on the intercom, reminding everyone to fasten seatbelts due to upcoming turbulence. The note of irritation in her voice was unmistakable. Lucy tensed, wondering if Harriet was about to reappear, but she did not. Instead, the plane shuddered briefly, and Lucy tightened her belt, bracing herself. Through the window, she saw distant flashes of lightning, nature's fireworks on the horizon. Outside, the sky painted a dramatic backdrop of swirling clouds, illuminated by sporadic lightning. Inside, Lucy's thoughts were just as turbulent. She replayed Harriet's accusations of privilege. As the mayor's daughter, Lucy had always tried to downplay her father's status, wanting to be treated like anyone else. She couldn't help but feel Harriet's resentment was misplaced, yet also recognized. It came from a well of pain. A tiny part of Lucy even felt empathy, though that was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing sense of unease. Time dragged on until a quiet chime indicated the flight was finally beginning its descent into Los Angeles. A collective sigh of relief swept through the cabin. Bags were stowed, seat backs were raised, and tray tables locked. Lucy felt her stomach flutter with anticipation. Soon she would be free of this airborne purgatory. But as the plane dipped below the clouds, Harriet emerged from the galley one last time, her face pale but resolute. The final clash was imminent, and no one, least of all, Lucy, could predict the dramatic turn it would take. As the Boeing 737 MAX began its final approach to Los Angeles International Airport, the seatbelt sign glowed steadily. Cabin lights remained dim, providing a hushed, almost eerie ambience. Harriet positioned herself at the front of the aisle, scanning the passengers. Her eyes found Lucy again, and a flicker of something indiscernible crossed her features: anger, regret, or perhaps both. Lucy swallowed hard, hoping the flight would land quickly and she could escape Harriet's gaze. The anticipation of arrival was thick, but fate had one more twist to reveal. Suddenly, the plane lurched as a pocket of turbulent air rocked it sideways. Gasps echoed in the cabin, and Harriet nearly lost her footing. She grabbed an overhead compartment for support, Lucy felt her heart skip a beat. She tightened her seatbelt until it pressed into her lap. Outside, the runway lights were visible through a haze, welcoming yet distorted by the plane's trembling descent. The pilot's voice sounded over the intercom, urging everyone to remain calm. In that moment of collective tension, a child in the back row let out a frightened cry, prompting a chain reaction of nervous chatter. The baby from earlier began wailing, its plaintive sobs magnified in the confined space. Harriet, regaining her balance, tried to continue the landing announcements, but the fear in her own voice was apparent. Lucy's knuckles turned white as she clutched the armrests, bracing for a rough touchdown. Then, a startling jolt as the landing gear touched the runway, a bounce, then another. Passengers shrieked. The pilot fought to stabilize the aircraft, engine thrust roaring in quick bursts. Finally, with a screech of tires, the plane settled onto solid ground, speeding along the tarmac before gradually slowing. A collective exhale filled the cabin, relief mixing with residual terror. Applause broke out, though it was nervous and stilted. As the plane taxied to the gate, Harriet's voice returned to the intercom, instructing passengers to remain seated until the seatbelt sign turned off. Her tone had a forced calm, like someone fighting to hold themselves together. Lucy closed her eyes, relieved to have landed safely. She daydreamed about the comforting embrace her father would surely offer once she reached him. The seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began unbuckling and collecting their belongings. But Harriet wasn't done. She moved swiftly down the aisle, her focus locked on Lucy. People stepped aside, uncertain what was happening. In a moment that seemed to stretch in slow motion, Harriet confronted Lucy. She hissed that she knew Lucy's type, entitled brats who got everything handed to them. Lucy's eyes widened in shock. She opened her mouth to defend herself, but words refused to come. The older woman in the seat next to Lucy tried to intervene, but Harriet delivered a sharp retort, saying this was between her and Lucy. In a last, desperate bid to validate her fury, Harriet raised a hand and brought it down in a slap across Lucy's cheek. The entire row gasped. Lucy's head snapped to the side, tears spilling instantly. The collective outrage was immediate and deafening. Passengers shouted, some leaping from their seats to intervene. Officer Martinez rushed forward, grabbing Harriet's wrist before she could strike again. Lucy's seatmate wrapped a protective arm around her, glaring daggers at Harriet. Chaos erupted. A man in a business suit demanded to know the flight attendant's name so he could file a formal complaint. A mother further down the aisle started yelling, calling Harriet unfit for her job. Harriet, eyes wild, seemed momentarily stunned by her own actions. She tried to back away, but Officer Martinez held her firmly, instructing her to remain still. Maria and another flight attendant arrived, horrified by the scene. They pleaded with the passengers to stay calm, but the tension was at a boiling point. Lucy's cheek stung, but more painful was the wave of humiliation and disbelief washing over her. She realized Harriet had no idea of her true identity. She was just a convenient target. The mayor's daughter slapped in front of a plane full of witnesses. Yet Lucy also felt a surge of anger. She rose from her seat, voice trembling, and asked Harriet why she hated her so much. Harriet could only stare, breath labored, her lip quivering as the gravity of her action dawned on her. The commotion drew the attention of airport authorities waiting outside the jet bridge. As soon as the airplane door was opened, uniformed security officers and airline supervisors boarded. Shocked passengers recounted what had happened. Harriet stood there, frozen, while Lucy held a hand to her throbbing cheek. The entire flight had become a witness to an unthinkable crossing of professional boundaries, and there would be consequences beyond what anyone could predict. The stage was set for an explosive confrontation with powers Harriet never knew she was provoking. The second the cabin door swung open, two airline supervisors in crisp uniforms boarded, followed closely by an airport security officer. A hush fell as the supervisors surveyed the distraught passengers. Lucy still cradled her cheek, tears slipping down her face. Officer Martinez stepped aside, letting the uniformed officers take charge. Harriet stood rigid, eyes darting to the floor as if searching for an escape hatch. But there was none. Passengers wasted no time reporting what they had witnessed, voices brimming with indignation. One supervisor, a woman with a polished demeanor, approached Lucy gently, asking if she needed medical attention. Lucy shook her head, but confessed that her cheek hurt and she felt dizzy from shock. The supervisor apologized profusely on behalf of the airline, assuring Lucy that they would handle the situation. Harriet's face paled, her composure teetering on the edge. She attempted to speak, but her supervisor cut her off, instructing her to remain silent until they could get a full statement. While Harriet was led away to the galley, Lucy was ushered off the plane by the airline supervisor and Officer Martinez. A wave of relief washed over Lucy as she stepped onto the jet bridge, though her heart still raced. The terminal lights seemed harsh, a jarring contrast to the dim cabin. Word of the incident spread quickly among airport personnel. Several staffers stood by, whispering and exchanging shocked glances. Down in the arrivals area, Mayor Harold Ainsworth was already waiting, having landed on an earlier flight. He paced anxiously, glancing at his watch. His mind spun with thoughts of the ongoing political scandal back home, but nothing mattered more than reuniting with Lucy. When a hurried airline representative approached him, breathless and pale, he knew something was terribly wrong. The representative asked him to follow, offering vague assurances that Lucy was physically okay. Within minutes, father and daughter were face to face in a private waiting area, separated from the bustle of other travelers. Lucy ran into her father's arms, tears flowing freely. Mayor Ainsworth felt his heart twist at the sight of the red mark on her cheek. He demanded an explanation, voice trembling with a mixture of anger and concern. The airline supervisor, her composure cracking, described the assault by Harriet. She assured the mayor that this behavior was intolerable and would be dealt with swiftly. Mayor Ainsworth held Lucy close, waves of protective fury coursing through him. While he'd been under political attack for weeks, none of that mattered compared to the safety and dignity of his daughter. He thanked Officer Martinez, who had accompanied Lucy. The off-duty officer provided a statement of what happened, emphasizing Harriet's unprovoked aggression. The mayor's jaw tightened as he listened, outraged that anyone would harm a child, let alone his own. Meanwhile, in a separate office, Harriet was being questioned by airline management and security. She attempted to downplay the slap as a momentary lapse in judgment, blaming stress and personal problems. Her supervisor looked unimpressed, reminding her of the airline's zero-tolerance policy for violence. Harriet insisted she didn't know who Lucy was and that the girl had provoked her through repeated disrespect. But Harriet's voice trembled, betraying the guilt and panic she tried so hard to mask. Outside, a group of curious passengers who had witnessed the slap lingered near the gate, some filming with their phones. Words spread like wildfire through social media, with posts labeling Harriet as the flight attendant who slapped a mystery girl. None of them realized Lucy's identity yet. The mayor's security detail arrived shortly thereafter, escorting Lucy and her father through a side corridor to avoid further public spectacle. As they made their way through the airport, Lucy clung to her father's hand, her mind a blur of conflicting emotions: humiliation, anger, relief, and a strange pity for Harriet. She couldn't forget the torment in Harriet's eyes. Even as her cheek throbbed, Lucy felt a pang of sympathy for a woman clearly in the throes of a personal crisis. Still, sympathy did not negate the sheer terror and hurt she had experienced. The mayor, however, was focused on one thing: justice. He insisted on filing a formal complaint and threatened legal action. Airline representatives, now fully aware of Lucy's identity, scrambled to contain the scandal. They offered immediate apologies, free travel vouchers, and promises of an internal investigation. But the mayor made it clear he would accept nothing less than Harriet's termination and a thorough, transparent inquiry. Harriet's fate hung in the balance, and the scales of karma were starting to tip. Back in the office where Harriet was being questioned, the atmosphere grew more charged by the minute. Her supervisor confronted her with eyewitness accounts, some of which had been recorded on cell phones. Harriet's attempts at justification sounded weak, even to her own ears. She argued that she hadn't realized Lucy was so young, or that she was dealing with the mayor's child. But deep down, Harriet knew she had acted recklessly, letting her anger override all sense of professionalism. The airline's human resources manager arrived, face grave. She outlined the immediate consequences: Harriet's suspension, pending a full investigation. Harriet's eyes brimmed with tears as she realized her job, a lifeline she desperately needed, was likely gone. The HR manager gently but firmly instructed Harriet to hand over her employee badge and warned her not to engage with any passengers or media. Harriet's shoulders slumped, the weight of her actions crashing down. Meanwhile, Lucy and Mayor Ainsworth sat in a private lounge, surrounded by the mayor's aides and a couple of airport officials. Lucy clung to a cold compress against her cheek, the swelling a tangible reminder of the day's trauma. One of the aides mentioned the possibility of a press conference, given the severity of the incident. The mayor hesitated. He wanted to protect Lucy from further public scrutiny, yet he also felt compelled to address what had happened. The line between personal and political blurred, leaving him in a precarious position. Unbeknownst to them, social media was ablaze. Multiple passengers had posted short videos and photos of Harriet's outburst. Though Lucy's identity was obscured in most clips, some had captured her face and recognized her as the mayor's daughter. Speculation ran wild, with online debates raging about flight attendants' working conditions, the pressures of public service, and the blurred lines between a child's private life and a parent's public role. Flight Slap trended on several platforms, fueling the scandal. Officer Martinez had stayed behind to give a detailed statement to airport security, praising Lucy's behavior throughout the ordeal. He admitted he had never seen a situation escalate so rapidly without provocation. The officer's testimony added weight to the case against Harriet, solidifying the airline's stance that this was more than a minor slip-up. Airport security eventually escorted Harriet out of the staff office. She was visibly shaken, her eyes puffy from tears. As Harriet walked through the corridors of LAX, she felt an overwhelming sense of alienation. Colleagues who once greeted her with casual smiles now avoided eye contact. She overheard whispers of condemnation, caught glimpses of disapproving stares. The internet's judgment had already leapt ahead, labeling her as a monster. Her phone buzzed incessantly with calls and texts from unknown numbers. Harriet dared not answer. She feared the torrent of vitriol waiting for her on the other end. At the same time, Lucy sat quietly, her father's arm around her shoulder. She could sense his internal battle, whether to unleash the full force of his political influence or handle things more discreetly. Lucy mustered the courage to speak her mind. She said she didn't want Harriet's life to be ruined, but she also didn't want to dismiss the gravity of the assault. Her father listened, torn between paternal rage and his daughter's compassion. In that moment, he recognized a newfound maturity in Lucy that filled him with both pride and sorrow. The mayor's decision came swiftly. He would hold a brief press conference to confirm the incident and call for accountability, but he would also emphasize his empathy for airline workers under extreme stress. He wanted to show the public that Lucy was safe and that their family was not seeking vengeance for vengeance's sake, but rather justice and change. It was a calculated move, balancing the demands of public office with the moral teachings he had tried to instill in Lucy. The press conference was set up near a quieter part of the terminal. Cameras from local news stations and a few national outlets lined up, reporters jostling for position. Lucy stayed backstage as her father took the podium. He addressed the incident in measured tones, confirming that his daughter had been assaulted but was not seriously injured. He expressed shock and disappointment, calling for the airline to investigate and for Harriet to face appropriate consequences. The flash of cameras illuminated the mayor's solemn expression, capturing a father torn between duty and outrage. By the time the mayor finished speaking, Harriet was already en route to her small apartment, her uniform wrinkled and stained with the day's turmoil. She stared out the taxi window at the bright Los Angeles skyline, feeling more lost than ever. She had no job, no partner, and now no reputation to salvage. The karmic tide had turned, and Harriet found herself facing the repercussions of her own unraveling. Little did she know that a final twist awaited, one that would push her to confront not just her actions, but the deeper wounds that had driven her to such a breaking point. Days passed. News of the flight attendant slap spread beyond local channels and became a national talking point. Morning shows debated the pressure on airline workers, while political commentators speculated on how this might affect Mayor Ainsworth's career. Lucy stayed mostly out of public view, attending medical checkups to ensure there was no lasting injury. Her father fielded questions at every turn, navigating the tightrope between protecting Lucy's privacy and addressing the uproar. Harriet spent those days holed up in her apartment, blinds drawn, phone silent. She had been placed on unpaid leave, and every attempt to plead her case to the airline was met with cold formality. The outcry on social media had escalated, turning her into a villainous meme overnight. Bills stacked on the kitchen counter, unopened. A single lamp cast long shadows across the walls, echoing the despair that clung to her like a dark shroud. One afternoon, Harriet mustered the courage to watch the videos posted online. She saw herself towering over Lucy, fury distorting her features, and witnessed the slap from multiple angles. The shock was visceral, as though watching a stranger commit the act. In that moment, she realized the depth of her misconduct. She cried, not just for the shame of being caught, but for the realization that she had genuinely harmed an innocent girl. In the quiet of her living room, Harriet confronted a truth she had been avoiding. Her life was in free fall, and she had dragged Lucy into her personal storm. Meanwhile, Lucy struggled with a mix of emotions, anger, sadness, and a surprising sense of pity. She told her father she wanted to move on, resume her normal life. Her cheek still bore a faint bruise, a silent reminder of the ordeal. At school, curious classmates bombarded her with questions, their eyes wide with fascination. Some whispered that she was brave. Others found the story thrilling gossip. Lucy felt exposed, longing for the days when she was just a regular student, not the girl who got slapped by a flight attendant. Mayor Ainsworth, under scrutiny for how he handled the situation, held private meetings with airline executives. They discussed potential settlements, apologies, and the future of Harriet's employment. Lawyers advised the mayor to push for a lawsuit. Some believed the publicity could help his image by positioning him as a protector of children's rights. But Lucy's discomfort weighed heavily on him. Despite the political calculations, he was a father first, unwilling to make Lucy's trauma a publicity stunt. The airline made a public statement condemning Harriet's actions and assuring the public that they had zero tolerance for violence. They hinted at further disciplinary measures, possibly even criminal charges. Public opinion was divided. Some demanded Harriet's arrest. Others pointed to a mental breakdown, questioning if she needed psychiatric help rather than punishment. The debate raged on talk radio and internet forums. Harriet's finances hit rock bottom. With no income and a pile of debts, she faced eviction. Desperate, she contacted a local legal aid clinic, hoping to navigate her looming court date. She had been officially charged with assault on a minor. The volunteer attorney assigned to her case listened sympathetically, but made it clear that Harriet's prospects were grim. The video evidence was damning, and Lucy's testimony would be hard to dispute. In a twist no one saw coming, Lucy reached out through a family friend to request a private conversation with Harriet. She felt she needed closure, a chance to understand what had driven Harriet to such extremes. Her father was initially opposed, but he eventually relented, trusting Lucy's judgment. Arrangements were made, and a week after the incident, Lucy found herself in a small conference room at a neutral location, awaiting Harriet's arrival. When Harriet walked in, she looked drastically different from the stern, uniformed woman Lucy remembered. She wore simple jeans and a faded sweater, her hair pulled back in a messy bun. Dark circles rimmed her eyes, and she moved with the hesitant air of someone expecting judgment. Lucy felt her heart flutter with nerves, but she also felt an inexplicable wave of compassion. Harriet took a seat across from her, struggling to meet Lucy's gaze. After a few tense moments, Lucy broke the silence. She asked Harriet plainly why she had singled her out. Harriet hesitated, tears welling up as she recounted her troubles, loneliness, financial ruin, and a mounting sense of despair. She admitted she saw Lucy's innocence and thought of her own lost youth, resenting the girl's perceived privilege. Tears streamed down Harriet's cheeks as she apologized, voice shaking. Lucy listened, face solemn, absorbing each word. Their conversation would prove to be a catalyst for an ending no one had anticipated. For several minutes, Lucy and Harriet sat in that conference room, grappling with an uneasy truce. Harriet's guilt poured out in halting sentences. She confessed she had lashed out at Lucy because she represented everything Harriet felt she'd lost: hope, a bright future, and someone who believed the world was still fair. In the absence of better coping mechanisms, Harriet had fixated on Lucy as the embodiment of her own failures. She begged Lucy's forgiveness, but emphasized that she understood if it was too much to ask. Lucy's voice trembled when she replied. She explained that her life wasn't as perfect as Harriet assumed. Being the mayor's daughter came with immense scrutiny, and she'd struggled with anxiety and constant public judgment. She acknowledged Harriet's pain, but also made it clear that nothing excused violence. "I'm not here to pretend everything's okay," Lucy said softly, "but I needed to hear why." As Harriet wept, Lucy felt an odd sense of relief. Confronting Harriet humanized the woman who had once seemed like a monstrous aggressor. While it didn't erase the trauma of the slap, it provided a context and explanation that made Harriet's actions more pitiful than hateful. By the end of their conversation, Lucy offered a tentative acceptance of Harriet's apology, though she stopped short of granting full forgiveness. Some wounds, she reasoned, needed time to heal. Unbeknownst to Lucy, her conversation with Harriet was a turning point for both of them. Word reached the mayor, who began reconsidering the severity of the legal action. While he still believed Harriet needed to face consequences, he was moved by Lucy's empathy. The attorneys representing Lucy's interests advised that pressing for maximum penalties could be seen as vindictive. Mayor Ainsworth weighed his options, mindful that the public eye was still on him. Meanwhile, Harriet emerged from the conference room shaken but oddly lighter, as though a burden had been lifted. The guilt remained, but now she felt compelled to seek genuine help. She scheduled a therapy appointment through a local clinic, determined to address the root causes of her anger and despair. She couldn't alter the past, but she could change the path she walked going forward. It was a small step, yet it felt monumental. The media swarmed when rumors surfaced of Lucy's private meeting with Harriet. Journalists speculated about a possible reconciliation or a carefully orchestrated PR stunt. Lucy ignored the noise, focusing on her art and schoolwork. She found a strange solace in pouring her emotions onto paper, sketching scenes from that fateful flight with raw intensity. Each pencil stroke helped her process the emotional labyrinth she'd been thrust into. In a calculated move, the mayor gave another short press statement, clarifying that legal proceedings would continue but expressing hope for restorative justice. He acknowledged the stress flight attendant's face, but reiterated that violence against a minor could not be dismissed. Public opinion shifted again. Some lauded Lucy and her father for showing compassion. Others accused them of political maneuvering. Lucy tried not to let it bother her. She'd witnessed enough grown-up drama to last a lifetime. A court date was set, drawing national attention. Harriet's lawyer negotiated for a plea deal, aiming to reduce potential jail time. The video evidence was conclusive. Harriet had no plausible defense. Character witnesses, including Maria and Officer Martinez, painted Harriet as a troubled individual rather than a hardened criminal. They spoke of her emotional fragility, her financial struggles, and the remorse she'd shown since the incident. On the day of the hearing, Harriet approached Lucy in the courthouse hallway. Under the watchful eyes of reporters and court officers, she offered a subdued greeting. Lucy mustered a gentle nod, her expression grave but not hostile. Harriet's lawyer and the prosecutor exchanged final paperwork, setting the stage for a decisive moment. Tension crackled through the corridors as the two stepped into the courtroom, a hush falling over the assembled spectators. The judge reviewed the evidence and heard from both sides. Harriet pled guilty to a lesser charge of assault, sparing her a trial. In a dramatic moment, Lucy addressed the court, recounting the emotional impact of the slap, but also emphasizing Harriet's remorse. When asked for a recommendation on sentencing, Lucy hesitated, then voiced her hope that Harriet receive help rather than severe punishment. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs, cameras clicking, as Lucy spoke with a composure far beyond her years. The path to closure was in sight, but the final verdict still hung in the air. Silence gripped the courtroom as the judge prepared to issue the sentence. Harriet stood, head bowed, while Lucy and Mayor Ainsworth watched from a row behind the prosecution's table. In a measured tone, the judge declared that Harriet's actions were inexcusable, especially given her position of responsibility aboard an aircraft. Yet the court also acknowledged Harriet's remorse and personal struggles. Ultimately, Harriet was sentenced to community service, mandatory anger management counseling, and probation. No jail time. A collective exhale spread through the courtroom. Some onlookers felt the sentence was too lenient, while others found it fitting. Harriet nodded, tears sliding down her cheeks. The judge's parting words resonated. Use this opportunity to rebuild rather than self-destruct. After the gavel banged, Harriet turned and locked eyes with Lucy, her lips forming a silent thank you. Lucy offered a subdued nod. Although the bruise on her cheek had faded, the memory remained a testament to the power of compassion balanced with accountability. In the days that followed, the media's fervor gradually waned, shifting focus to the next sensational headline. Mayor Ainsworth and Lucy quietly returned to their routines, though the mayor's political rivals tried unsuccessfully to spin the incident into a narrative of leadership weakness. Most voters saw Lucy's stance as a reflection of her father's values, and the mayor's approval ratings even saw a slight boost. Lucy, however, remained unchanged by the fleeting polls. She simply longed for normalcy. Harriet began her court-ordered community service at a local shelter, where she served meals and organized donations. The work was humble and often tedious, but it forced her to confront the realities of hardship faced by many. In the course of her duties, she discovered small moments of grace, like when a grateful family thanked her for a warm meal, or when a child offered her a dandelion as a token of appreciation. Though her future with the airline was over, Harriet found a semblance of purpose in helping others. One afternoon, Harriet found herself drawing pictures with a group of children at the shelter. She recalled Lucy's sketchbook and wondered what the girl was drawing now. The memory of that flight haunted her, but also propelled her forward. In some unspoken way, Harriet felt she owed Lucy a debt, a commitment to be better, to channel her pain into compassion rather than rage. Each day at the shelter became a chance to repay that debt, one act of kindness at a time. Meanwhile, Lucy tried to put the ordeal behind her. She returned to school, found solace in her art, and gradually stopped flinching at sudden movements near her face. When classmates asked her about the incident, she offered a polite but brief response. Over time, the questions died down. She confided in her father that she still wrestled with a nagging sense of pity for Harriet. The mayor encouraged her to hold on to empathy, reminding Lucy that compassion made them human, but so did setting boundaries. Life moved on, as it often does. Mayor Ainsworth focused on city projects, steering the public discourse away from scandal and back to civic improvements. Lucy attended workshops for young artists, discovering a passion for painting cityscapes with bold, sweeping brushstrokes. She poured her experiences into her art, creating a piece titled Altitude, which depicted an airplane slicing through a stormy sky, a single beam of sunlight breaking through the clouds. Months later, Harriet's probation officer noted her diligent participation in anger management sessions. The counselor observed Harriet's genuine remorse and the progress she had made in addressing her emotional triggers. Gradually, Harriet felt a glimmer of hope. She still had debts to manage, and finding steady employment was challenging with her public record. Yet she was determined to forge ahead, using her time at the shelter to build a different life. On a crisp autumn day, Harriet ventured into a local art gallery that offered free weekend exhibits. She walked slowly, pausing at each piece. Her heart nearly skipped a beat when she saw a painting that mirrored the feelings of flight and turbulence. The plaque read, "Altitude" by Lucy Ainsworth. Harriet stared, transfixed by the swirling clouds and the single ray of light. In the bold strokes, she sensed Lucy's pain, her resilience, and her capacity for forgiveness. Harriet never spoke to Lucy again, not directly. She didn't need to. Standing there, she understood that their lives had intersected in a cataclysmic moment that revealed both the worst and best parts of themselves. The slap that had once echoed with malice now echoed with lessons learned. Harriet took a quiet breath and left the gallery, resolved to continue her path of accountability and growth. For Lucy, life stretched ahead like a horizon full of unknowns, but she carried within her the unbreakable spirit of a young girl who had faced injustice and chosen to respond with empathy. In that choice lay the true karmic retribution, a cycle broken, a story rewritten. 2 years later, the city was abuzz with a local arts festival showcasing emerging talents. Lucy, now 16, was invited to display her work. She stood among a collection of her paintings, greeting curious visitors. Her style had evolved, still full of vibrant contrasts, reflecting the turbulence of her experiences, yet always hinting at hope. The festival drew media attention, partly because she was the mayor's daughter, but also because her art had begun gaining a following in its own right. Mayor Ainsworth was there, all smiles as he supported his daughter. He had weathered his political storms and even passed significant reforms to improve social services. The scandal of the slap had long since faded from public consciousness, replaced by more pressing issues in a city that always marched forward. Still, Lucy felt a small pang each time she recalled the incident. It had marked a turning point in her adolescence, teaching her resilience and empathy. On the other side of town, Harriet lived in a modest apartment she now shared with a colleague from her volunteer work. She had completed her probation and mandatory counseling, finding a job at a non-profit that arranged travel for underprivileged families needing medical treatment. Though her wages were modest, Harriet found the work deeply fulfilling. She answered phones, organized itineraries, and offered a reassuring voice to those anxious about flying. In a quiet way, she was redeeming herself with every family she helped. One crisp Saturday, Harriet mustered the courage to attend the arts festival. She had followed Lucy's progress in the local news, curiosity pulling her out of her comfort zone. Wearing a simple dress and a light jacket, Harriet walked through rows of colorful stalls filled with paintings, sculptures, and handmade crafts. Each exhibit brimmed with creativity, but she was looking for one artist in particular. Eventually, Harriet spotted Lucy's booth. She felt her heart pound as she observed Lucy talking animatedly with visitors about her paintings. Harriet approached cautiously, staying at the periphery of the crowd. She wasn't sure if Lucy would recognize her, or if she even wanted to be recognized. But something compelled Harriet to see, at least from a distance, how Lucy was doing. The paintings on display were striking abstract city skylines, swirling with light and shadow, reminiscent of the luminous chaos Harriet herself had once felt. Lucy glanced up, her eyes sweeping across the gathering. She locked onto Harriet's face. Surprise flickered in her expression. The two stood there, separated by a crowd, memories of a shared flight bridging the distance. Harriet felt the urge to leave, anxiety tugging at her. But Lucy offered a small, almost imperceptible smile and a respectful nod. Harriet's chest tightened. She raised a hand in a gentle wave, acknowledging Lucy's unspoken greeting. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Later that evening, Lucy reflected on the encounter. She felt no fear or anger, only a profound sense of closure. Harriet had stepped out of the shadows, not to beg for forgiveness, but perhaps to confirm that Lucy had moved on. In that moment, Lucy realized she had truly found peace. The bruise was gone, her perspective forever changed, but the bitterness had dissolved. She jotted down a note in her journal about life's surprising intersections and how empathy could eclipse even the darkest wrongs. Harriet, on her way home from the festival, walked along a riverside path lit by string lights. She breathed in the cool evening air, a new sense of calm washing over her. In the distance, music from the festival drifted, mingling with the gentle rush of water. She pondered the fleeting moment she'd shared with Lucy, grateful that the girl had offered kindness instead of scorn. Harriet vowed to keep dedicating herself to service, believing that each ticket she booked for a needy family was another small step toward atonement. In the weeks that followed, Lucy's painting titled Crossing Paths, inspired by her festival encounter, earned a special commendation. It featured two shadowy silhouettes, standing at opposite ends of a jet bridge, joined by a swirl of bright colors overhead. Critics praised its emotional depth and subtle optimism. Lucy's father purchased the piece at a silent auction, though Lucy joked he could have simply asked her for it. She donated the proceeds to a local charity that supported mental health resources for struggling youth, quietly honoring Harriet's battles. As time stretched on, life led Lucy and Harriet on separate journeys. Lucy focused on her upcoming college applications, determined to study fine arts and psychology, hoping to combine creative expression with helping others. Harriet continued her path at the non-profit, eventually spearheading a program that offered counseling referrals for families dealing with medical trauma. Though their worlds no longer collided, the impact of that flight remained. Their story stood as testament to how a single moment of cruelty could evolve into a lesson in compassion, reminding them, and anyone who witnessed their paths, that sometimes the harshest turbulence can give way to the brightest horizons. Thank you for staying with us through this deeply moving and suspenseful tale. We witnessed how a single flight could become a crucible for hidden pain, unspoken regrets, and unexpected empathy. Lucy's quiet resolve in the face of humiliation illuminated the strength that lies in forgiveness, yet also showed that compassion does not trivialize the impact of wrongdoing. Harriet's spiral revealed how life's pressures can twist even our best intentions, leading to consequences far beyond what we imagine in a moment of anger. In the end, the turbulence wasn't just in the skies. It was in the hearts of two people from very different walks of life, forced to confront each other's humanity under extraordinary circumstances. Their story stands as a testament that every conflict, no matter how shocking, carries the seeds of understanding and change if we're willing to embrace accountability and open our hearts to forgiveness. If this journey resonated with you, please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Your engagement helps us continue crafting stories that entertain, provoke reflection, and remind us of the resilience we all carry within. Share this video with friends or family members who might find solace or inspiration here. In a world so often plagued by division, every act of empathy and every conversation sparked by a story like this can bring us closer to a more compassionate future. Thank you again for watching, and may this story encourage each of us to consider how we face our own storms, whether in flight or on the ground, and how we might emerge from them a little wiser, a little stronger, and a lot more empathetic toward our fellow travelers in life.